Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm Tom Carper. Privileged to be here with Senator Dick Durbin, our whip on the Democratic side, Richard Blumenthal, who's not only a wonderful senator, former attorney general, a great swimmer, but also a veteran and someone who cares about as much as anybody I know about making sure veterans get a fair shake. But especially want to thank Chris for joining us, and thank you for being here and for your service. I tell people ask me what do, I tell them I'm a retired Navy captain. I spent 5 years on active duty in a hot war in Southeast Asia, another 18 years as a P-3 aircraft mission commander in the Cold War, right up to the end of the Cold War, and stepped down, retired. And when I was serving with this guy in the House of Representatives, and privileged to be governor for 8 years, including I was 8 years commander-in-chief of the Delaware National Guard, and so I spent some time, big part of my life has been involved with the military, and I love that opportunity to serve. My dad was a World War II veteran, chief petty officer in the Navy, and a bunch of my uncles were as well. One of them got killed in the Pacific in a kamikaze attack on a ship called the USS Sewanee aircraft carrier. My dad came home, and along with the other my uncles, my dad had a chance to take advantage of the GI Bill. Got some training in auto body repair. You know, like when a car's in a wreck, and you have to have people can fix the dents and try to make it look as good as new. And he got some training to do that. Ended up working in body repair in Beckley, West Virginia, where I was born, where he grew up, and for Burleson Oldsmobile. And a year or so later, he's doing work on a car that's insured by Nationwide Insurance. And the car, the guy who's the insurance adjuster comes by one day to sort of get an estimate for the damage and that kind of thing. And he said to my dad, he said, you know, you could do what I do. You could be an insurance adjuster. And my dad said, really? And he said, yeah. He said, what have you done with your life? My dad said, I was chief petty officer in World War II. I've had this training so I can do this job here now. And 2 years later, my dad was an insurance adjuster for Nationwide Insurance. And about 15 years later, he was for Nationwide Insurance, the guy who trained insurance adjusters for all of America in their home office in Columbus, Ohio. And it started really with, he was a high school graduate. He really started with a chance to serve in the Navy, chance to parlay that into the GI Bill and to get some training that made him able to do remarkable things with his life. And so I always think of him, when my dad and his generation of my uncles came back from World War II, we had this GI benefit modest, but there were scam artists that emerged to take advantage of the GIs and to take advantage of their benefit. And at the end of Korea, same thing happened. My Uncle Ed came home from Marine Korea, and same thing happened. A lot of people benefited enormously from the GI Bill, but there were scam artists that emerged to try to take advantage of the GI and the benefit. Vietnam veteran, we got about $250 a month when we came back to go to college. I was grateful to have every bit of it. Served in served in the reserves, and served a couple of weekends a month to fly and make enough money to live on. And but the GI benefit was helpful to me. The benefit really took off in during in the last 5, 6, 7 years. And folks coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, they no longer get $250 a month. They get a huge benefit. It can be passed off to your spouse, can be passed off to your dependent children. And as that happens, we have folks that emerge to take advantage of the GIs and, frankly, to take advantage of taxpayers. I'll close with this thought before I hand it off to Senator Durbin. About a little over 20 years ago, Congress said, we got a potential problem here because we have some private, for-profit colleges and universities and training programs that are taking advantage of GIs and the taxpayers. And they established something, kind of a market-based approach to say we want to make sure these institutions of higher learning have some skin in the game. We wanted to harness market forces to make sure that taxpayers and the GIs are getting a fair deal, because some institutions were getting 100% of the revenues, 100% of the revenues from the federal government. People said, that's not good. We ought to make it 90%. And there was a loophole. There was a loophole in the law that was adopted, I think, in '92, and the loophole said didn't count against the 90%, did not include GI Bill, did not include something called tuition assistance, which is tuition assistance for people on active duty. So what we have today is we have a bunch of post-secondary colleges and universities, other training programs, where these folks are getting 100% of the revenues, 100% of the revenues from the federal government. Some of them do a great job, and frankly, to be honest with you, some of them do not. And we are here today to try to make real the 90-10 rule, to make sure that no institution in this country is going to get 100% of the revenues. The market forces prevail, and they do so on behalf of, we have some skin in the game, and the folks that are GIs coming back from wars, Afghanistan, Iraq, or some other place around the world, they're getting a fair deal along with the taxpayers. Tom Harkin is not with us today. He has worked this issue forever as a former chairman of the Health, Education, Labor, Pensions Committee, and joining him in that effort for many, many years has been Senator Dick Durbin. And I'm happy to be his wingman on this, and happy to turn this over to Senator Dick Durbin. Thank you, Dick.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks very much. It's awful when young people sign up for college and it turns out to be a waste of time and a waste of money. I think it's just as bad, if not worse, when that same experience happens to someone who served in the military. We give them GI Bill and say, this is your chance. As you come out of the military, this is your chance to succeed in life, and we're going to be right there with you. We spend $2 billion a year on the GI Bill. For the men and women in uniform who we said will stand by you when you come home, we took a close look at their experience, and we found out that there were some troubling things. First, these for-profit colleges and universities, they charge tuition twice as much as regular schools. Secondly, we found out that the top 8 for-profit schools that provide help to the veterans, 7 of them are under investigation in many states for fraudulent activity. Well, who are the for-profit colleges and universities? Allow me to name some names so you might connect it up. University of Phoenix, heard of it? The largest, over 200,000 students nationwide. DeVry University out of Chicago, Illinois. Kaplan University, they used to own the Washington Post. These are groups that offer training and education to students, but also to the military. Now, they call themselves private sector, for-profit. That's a little hard to defend when you look at the reality. 90% of their revenue comes right out of the federal treasury through student loans. The students give their Pell Grants, their GI Bill benefits, and their student loans to the universities. 90%. And then, as Senator Carper mentioned, they found another wrinkle in it. They don't have to count the money that comes in through the GI Bill and tuition assistance for active military. So it's more than 90% of their revenue coming right out of the federal treasury. For-profit, private sector, a little hard to defend. There are 3 numbers to remember about the for-profit college and university industry in America that tell you why we're here. The first number is 10. 10% of all the students graduating from high school go to for-profit colleges and universities. The second number, 20. 20% of all the federal aid to education goes to those colleges and universities. 10% of the students, 20% of the federal aid, about $25 billion, I might add. Third number is the kicker, 44. 44% of all the student loan defaults in America are students from for-profit colleges and universities. So what we're trying to do is to bring some honesty when it comes to higher education. Students don't know any better. Shoot, I can get a Pell Grant and give it to this school. I can get a college direct loan, give it to this school. I can get my GI benefits, give it to this school. Must be a real school. And who wouldn't assume that? And they do. We don't do a good enough job in policing these schools. And secondly, what Senator Carper and Blumenthal and I are trying to do, hold them to 90% of their revenue coming out of the federal treasury. They're trying to get more. This has got to come to an end, because at the end of the day, if a student drops out of school because they can't cut it, too much debt, or they end up with a diploma that doesn't work, the losers just aren't the taxpayers. The losers are those students. And the losers are those veterans who've wasted their GI benefits on a school that's not worth it.
Thanks to Dick Durbin and Tom Carper, 2 of my most effective and dedicated colleagues. I'm really proud to stand with them, and thank you, Chris, for your service. Thank you to the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. The IAVA has been at the forefront of many of the most important fights today on behalf of veterans. None is more important than this one, although it's less visible and less easily understandable by most Americans, because the 90-10 rule sounds like some kind of technical, abstruse, Washington, D.C. language, but it has real-life consequences. It has real consequences to taxpayers who lose money to those for-profit schools that exploit our veterans. And it has real-life consequences to the veterans by dishonoring them and also creating false hopes and expectations and dreams when they think they are going to acquire real-life skills that will help them in the real world to continue serving this country in jobs that matter. And they find instead that the schools are making use of taxpayer money to lure them into institutions and courses that in fact help them very little. The 90-10 rule is a federal law that passed Congress in the 1990s, requiring for-profit schools to derive at least 10% of their revenues from sources other than Title VI of federal student loan aid, other than Title VI. But Congress left that loophole without specifying that the 10% couldn't come from the GI Bill. That's a loophole that we're simply trying to eliminate to the benefit of taxpayers and veterans. For-profit schools should not be using veterans as their private piggy bank. They should not be permitted to exploit our nation's heroes. They should not use their good names and take advantage of their hopes and dreams fraudulently. And closing this loophole is something that should unite us on a bipartisan basis because our veterans are best served by it. So, Chris, thanks for being here today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Senator, and thank you also for your leadership and helping us pass the Clay on Save Act earlier this year. Appreciate that, Senator Carper and Durbin, and stepping forward on this key issue. This week was the anniversary of the original passage of the GI Bill. So it's a perfect week to be introducing this legislation. And the promise of the GI Bill is very personal. It's personal to IAVA that was out leading and helping assist to pass the post-9/11 GI Bill, or GI Bill 2.0, new GI Bill. And it's personal for our members, and it's personal for me. Starting with my grandfather, who upon returning from World War II in the Pacific, survived the iconic Battle of Iwo Jima with the 5th Marines, returned to Chicago, Illinois, used the GI Bill to go to college. He learned how to start a small business, did start a small business, and became an entrepreneur and was successful, and returned on that promise to reinvest in the American economy. So 2 generations later, I had the same opportunity. Returned from Iraq, I was deployed in 2003 with a military police company out of Arlington Heights, Illinois, Senator Durbin's home state. Came back, made the transition, and went to school on both the Chapter 1606, 1607, and then later the post-9/11 GI Bill. So my bachelor's degree and going on to earn a master's degree at University of Illinois at Springfield would not have been possible without the GI Bill. So it's personal. Without that, I wouldn't be working at IAVA today. So very personal to us. So what are we going to do? We want to make sure that we can protect this benefit and preserve it, and make sure we can keep that promise for all the veterans that are going to school now and looking to make that tough consumer choice and going to school. And there's a problem. The 90-10 loophole is the driver of all of the problems in the for-profit industry. And I had the unique experience of working in the industry, my first job out of school. It was a great opportunity. I'm proud of it, learned a lot, and saw a lot of these things firsthand within the industry. And the 90-10 loophole, all of the CEOs, all of the leaders in this industry, the sales managers, they know what this is. And they adjust to it. And they put together military sales teams and these other strategies that are really geared at the sales and the front end and the recruiting. It's not really geared at the long view. And so for every veteran they enroll, they can enroll 9 other students on complete federal money. And that's a problem. It creates a strong incentive to recruit them. And there's a laundry list of some of the deceptive tactics. I'll just name one. Having advisors call and purport to be calling from the military admissions office, that's a sales gimmick. That's sort of these sort of fictional tactics. So closing this loophole is needed, and it does 2 good things. 1, it protects veterans, and 2, it protects taxpayers. Because Senator Carper's legislation, there's not another piece of legislation dealing with the GI Bill right now in Congress that's more important than this bill. This is the most important one. This legislation gets passed, these problems abate. The 90-10 legislation sends a message to leaders in the for-profit college industry. It says if you believe in strong student veteran outcomes, if you believe in the promise of the GI Bill, and you want these veterans to go on to be the next generation of leaders as we have previous generations, prove it. Invest in your programs, invest in instruction, and shift away from the front-end sales and the lip service we've been getting the last few years and focus on investing in those student veterans. And if you do that, this legislation moves forward, everyone wins. The veteran wins, the taxpayer wins, and the industry will win because the quality of their programs will be why those veterans select those schools and not because they're on the phone with a strong sales professional. So I just want to thank Senator Durbin and Carper, Senator Blumenthal for their leadership, and IEVA has your back on this. We're going to continue to have your back, and we look forward to working to get this legislation passed this year. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Before we open it for questions, and for Senator Durbin, again, Senator Durbin's been working these fields, I think, longer than I have, and I think with growing effectiveness. So joining us in co-sponsoring this legislation, so not just Senator Durbin, not just Senator Blumenthal and myself, but I think we have, as walking in this room, I think we have 25 co-sponsors. Very pleased with that, and we continue to build that. Well, I go home almost every night on the train, and close enough that I can do that. I see my constituents on a daily basis, and the other day a woman said to me, I don't mind paying more taxes or whatever. She's talking about the deficit. I don't mind paying more taxes. I just don't want you to waste my money. That's what she said. I don't mind paying more taxes. I just don't want you to waste my money. And we're talking about here trying to make sure, at least in this one area, we not only stop wasting her money, but Americans' money, and trying to make sure that we don't waste a great benefit for GIs and instead make sure they get what they deserve. Yes, ma'am, please.
Hi, I'm Penny Starr with CNS News. So I understand the one issue, that it's incentivizing these colleges to recruit veterans because they're going to get more federal money. I understand that. But it seems like there's another issue here of the quality of education, and it doesn't seem that this would help that in any way. So this is strictly just financial, so we take away these colleges from trying to recruit vets to get more federal money, correct?
Yes.
But it seems like a bigger issue is these, you know, if they recruit these veterans and they don't give them the life skills they need, and they go out, they can't get a job in the workforce.
Yeah, let me just make a brief comment and yield to Dick and to Richard. There's no silver bullet here. I like to say there's a lot of silver BBs. Some are bigger than others. And this legislation that Dick and Richard have championed for some time, this is a pretty big silver BB. Other work is being done by the Health, Education, Labor, Pensions Committee. Other work is being done by the VA itself. Part of what's going on here, we're interested in gainful employment. We're interested in making sure that when somebody gets one of these degrees or whatever, they actually get a job, provide for themselves. And there's work going on outside of the legislative work that we're doing here. And I think it's pretty good work. But all of it adds up. It's sort of like a multi-layered approach. This is an important element of that. Dick, you want to add to that?
There was just a Supreme Court case that said our government can regulate on the issue of gainful employment. If you go to this school and they say, we will train you so that you can be licensed to become a licensed practical nurse, for example, physical therapist, whatever it happens to be, they're going to hold them to that and to the accountability of how many people actually do end up with the jobs. Corinthian, I don't know if that rings a bell with you, Corinthian for-profit schools just went out of business, bankrupt, which is a whole other story. They lied to the government. They actually bribed companies to hire their graduates for 1 month so they could report to the government, oh, our graduates all got jobs. So we are coming down on them in a lot of different directions. There's so much fraud here. 44% of all the student loan defaults come from these schools. And what Tom Carper and Richard Blumenthal and I are doing is trying to squeeze them in the one area we know, and that is you've got to have a real school. You've got to collect real tuition money. You can't get all of it through federal money, you know. Are you a real school or is this a joke? Is it a scam? And whether it's GI benefits or government loans. So yes, we're coming at them in a lot of different directions.
And you are right that this is only one direction. Senator Harkin, when he was chairman of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, and I was a member of it at that time, did an investigation, a study, a report, which demonstrated very dramatically the points that Senator Durbin made so eloquently about these schools. And he named a few And the Department of Education is gradually, maybe too gradually, trying to raise the standards that apply here. It affects veterans particularly, but it affects lots of students around the country who enroll at these schools and often lose their own money. It's taxpayer money we're talking about here, but a lot of students lose their own money.
I might say, and I'm sure Dick and Chris and Richard remember this, several years ago, the Department of Education focused on gainful employment, was working on a regulation, and as I recall, there was they're called on the carpet rather than commended for their actions by the House representatives. I think they were called on the carpet for doing this, and there was a threat for legislative action to overturn a more robust gainful employment regulation. And so, rather than saying, we're with you and we want to make sure we're not going to waste the taxpayers' dollars, it was just the opposite. It was not just disappointing, shameful. Please.
And I would just add, veterans are still going to be great potential applicants for these schools. I mean, they still have the valuable benefit. It just takes the $ target off them, which is very much there right now. And it also is good for the advisor, who's under so much pressure from their sales manager. During my time in the industry, the veterans benefits were known as the military gravy train. And 2 years ago when I testified in front of Senator Durbin's committee, I said as such. That's how the benefits are looked at, the military gravy train, because of the 90-10 loophole. So you close the loophole, that view goes away. They can still be recruited as they would with anyone else. And one anecdote, just this week, I did an experiment. I went onto the website of my former employer, and you could all do it right now. I clicked on request information to connect with an advisor, and I asked one question. I said, I'm a veteran, and I have a question about your programs. How much does a business bachelor's degree program cost at your university? And it was answered with a question, asking me for more information, my last name, this and that, my zip code, all this nonsense. The same silly games we've been dealing with for years. And I asked the question again. And eventually, I was told, we're going to send you to a special military admissions team. So every single one of these advisors would be trained with the same training, but the gimmick of the military team, and they sent me a fee chart. And I pulled it down, I looked through it, I found the answer. It's between $70,000 and $80,000 a year. Now, it'd be nice if they just answered the question. So until we close the 90-10 loophole, that stuff is still going to occur.
Others, please. Yes, sir.
Yeah, a question. Michael Shore with Al Jazeera America. You're talking about the loophole right now, and that you have 25 co-sponsors. Is it a bipartisan group of co-sponsors?
It is, yeah, it is not. You're talking to a guy who I've been here 14, almost 15 years now, and almost every time I introduce a bill or an amendment, I always look for a Republican co-sponsor. We had 3 markups today in my 3 committees: Finance, Homeland Security, Environment and Public Works. And almost every bill that we marked up in those committees, including ones that I'd introduced, had bipartisan co-sponsorship. Disappointingly, this legislation today does not. We're on an educational campaign here. We want to make sure that not just the GIs and their families know about the threats, the opportunities, but also the threats that await them as they attempt to use their GI bills. We want to make sure that all the members of the Senate, the House, Democrats, Republicans know what's going on here. We want them to know what's going on here. And I'll say it again, some of these for-profit colleges and universities programs, they provide very good benefit, very good value for the money. Too many of them don't. We want to make sure everybody knows that. And our Republican colleagues aren't interested in wasting money either. And we want to make sure that they realize there's a lot of money being wasted here. And frankly, lives in some cases are being wasted.
If I could just follow it, Senator Durbin. As you've been at this for quite a while, working with Senator Harkin. If on something involving the GI Bill, you can't get bipartisan support in the Senate, and there's so much more that needs to be done, what's the plan for that? What's the outlook?
Tom put his finger on it. This is educational. And I make a few speeches on the subject on the floor. We've not had a vote on the floor on for-profit colleges and universities, and it's time. We may have our chance soon. Higher Education Act is coming up, and there are going to be quite a few things that we can address in the Higher Education Act. That'll be an opportunity for our colleagues to really get to know this issue firsthand. I'm hopeful that once they do, they'll realize this isn't partisan. We're trying to save the taxpayers' money, and we're trying to make sure in this case the veterans aren't exploited. That ought to be something that draws both parties together. Okay.
Anyone else? Going, gone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm Tom Carper. Privileged to be here with Senator Dick Durbin, our whip on the Democratic side, Richard Blumenthal, who's not only a wonderful senator, former attorney general, great swimmer, but also a veteran and someone who cares about as much as anybody I know about making sure veterans get a fair shake. But especially want to thank Chris for joining us, and thank you for being here and for your service. I tell people ask me what do I do. I tell them I'm a retired Navy captain. I spent 5 years on active duty in a hot war in Southeast Asia, another 18 years as a P-3 aircraft mission commander in a Cold War, right up to the end of the Cold War.